stream, singing Italian songs.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. We'll get started in just a few moments.
Yes, I can, and I've been waiting such a long time for Saturday. Another day in the park. I think it was the 4th of July.
All right, welcome again, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning to those of you who might be joining us from the West Coast or even further west. We are so thankful that you have chosen to spend some time with us today, and we are going to get right into today's conversation in just a moment. As we get started, I do want to take a moment to introduce myself as well as the work of the Redress Movement. I'm Kashana Hill, the still relatively new executive director here at the Redress Movement. Again, we're so thankful that all of you have chosen to spend time with us today, and we are so excited to have a conversation with Collette Pichon Battle, a very well-known and well-respected climate justice organizer and an attorney working here in the Deep South and really having a global impact. Today's conversation is titled Lessons from the Field, Environmental Impacts of Segregation. This is the fourth Lessons from the Field webinar that we here at the Redress Movement have hosted, and we are excited to continue this series where we are bringing practitioners to community to have conversations about the links between disparate outcomes and residential segregation. So today, as I mentioned, we're so excited to have Collette Pichon Battle with us. Here at the Redress Movement, we have been working to organize, change the narrative, educate communities, and win redress victories in communities across the country for just about 2 years now. As some of you may know, the Redress Movement was founded based on the response to the book, The Color of Law, which takes a look at and examines the forgotten history of the United States government's role in creating and then perpetuating segregation in communities all across the country. And so in putting together these webinars, we really like to take a look at the ways in which this country's history of racist and discriminatory housing policy has continued to impact communities all across the country. We are currently working in communities across the country on addressing and remediating the impacts of residential segregation. We are working to organize currently in Denver, Charlotte, and Milwaukee, and we are also bringing operations online soon in Omaha, Nebraska. So to anyone joining us from those communities, to anyone who has signed up to be a redress neighbor and engage in this movement with us, we thank you. We are honored by your presence here today, and we hope that you will gain something very valuable from today's conversation. I do want to ask that everyone please take time to note any questions that you may have. You may use the Q&A box to ask any questions, and then I will make sure to pose questions as we have time to Collette at the end of her remarks today. So with that, I am going to go ahead and introduce today's speaker, after which we'll play a very brief video and then Collette will join us. Collette Pichon Battle is an award-winning lawyer and climate justice organizer. She is a trusted voice in the climate justice and Black liberation movements, and her work focuses on creating spaces for frontline communities to gather and advance climate strategies that help us steward the water, energy, and land. Collette has a lot of accolades behind her, including being a 2019 Obama Fellow, and she is also the recipient of many prestigious awards, including the 2023 Heinz Award for the Environment, the 2022 Catalyst Award from Rachel's Network, and the 2022 William O. Douglas Award. Collette is the co-founder and currently the vision and initiatives partner for Taproot Earth, and she is a former corporate lawyer. As I mentioned, Collette's work continues to have an impact on a global stage. Internationally, she has gained recognition for her outstanding use of the legal and judicial processes to achieve environmental goals. After 17 years of work leading the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy's development of programming focused on equitable climate resilience in the Gulf South, in 2022, Collette expanded her vision into Taproot Earth, inspired by her learnings with the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy and movement partners across the U.S. South. When not working incredibly hard to save the world, you can find Collette spending her free time in rural Louisiana amongst the land, waters, and people who have poured love and nourishment into her from birth. I'm so honored and pleased to be able to introduce to you all Collette Pichon Battle, South Louisiana's own Collette Pichon Battle. And I know that she is going to have very, very, very impactful words to share with us all today. As soon as our video finishes, you will hear from Collette.
From radical seeds come radical and revolutionary roots. The main root is the taproot. Its first direction is down. It nourishes more roots that reach out, sometimes for miles, across borders, across generations. The root systems of live oaks can communicate and share water during the tidal surge of a Category 5 hurricane. The taproot of a cypress tree grows deep enough for the other roots to spread far and wide, building networks, building systems, building inspiration for a movement built on love and collective liberation, rooted in communities on the front lines of the climate crisis, guided by indigenous wisdom, watered by frontline experience, wisdom, and strength. Rooted in a Southern culture of resistance, rooted in Black liberation. Do you feel that? Grounded in generational struggles for freedom and liberation, seeded by the ancestors before us. Taproot Earth seeds frontline formations that draw strength from each other. We cultivate the soil that grows frontline power from the Gulf South to Appalachia to the Global South. We nurture the ability for our communities to rise from more severe storms, 100-year floods, and devastating fires, all part of a changing climate crisis. We envision a world where everyone can live, rest, and thrive in the place we love. If we work together, we can survive. If we move together, we can thrive. Choose now to move with us, from scarcity to abundance, from fear to love, from charity to power. Choose now to reimagine better management of natural resources. Choose now to innovate systems that govern our society in this new global reality. Choose now to fight for the planet and her people.
All right. Thank y'all so much. And thank you, Kashana, for that beautiful introduction. I think between your words and that video, it sums up who I am and who Taproot is. And I'm just so grateful and honored to be here, sister. I'm really proud of you and all the work that you've been doing, both in your old communities and in this new one that you're building. And peace, everyone. My name is Collette Pichon Battle. I use she, her pronouns. As Kashana mentioned, As Kashana mentioned, I'm the partner with Taproot Earth, and just really honored to be a part of this conversation. First, I want to just offer peace and honor to the land that I'm on. I am on the traditional Choctaw territory in South Louisiana, and just want to give my offering and my peace to that. And I want to offer peace to the places that you're coming in from and the territories that you're a part of. It's really important that we know the land on which we begin and do our work, the land on which we learn and rest and love. And so I want to encourage you, if you don't know whose indigenous land you're on, to look that up and offer peace and solidarity to those peoples. Um, I am also wanting to just offer a quick shout out to all the workers. It's May Day. It is not lost on me that this is International Workers' Day, and it is clear to me that so many folks on this call, but also in our networks, are working hard to provide for their families, to have a good life, to make a good life. And I just want to say peace to the people who are fighting for better working conditions, for labor regulations, for things that keep us safe at work. And peace to the folks who fight for us to understand and reimagine labor, to see the invisible labor that women often give, that caregivers give in that care economy. So just want to offer my peace and respect to those folks. And offering that peace and requesting that permission fit into the vision of Taproot Earth. We're a climate justice organization headquartered in Louisiana, and we work throughout the region. But our vision is very simple. It's simple but complex, I guess. We want a world where we can live, rest, and thrive in the places we love. And while this sounds simple, in places like South Louisiana, where we're losing land at one of the fastest rates on the planet, some of us won't be able to live, rest, or thrive in the place we love. It won't be here. And the climate crisis is presenting very real problems in that way for us to consider. And so what does this mean for a future that is obviously changing and a reality that is changing globally? It means we got to get to work. We've got to build power and cultivate solutions with the frontline communities that are actually advancing climate justice and advancing democracy. And that's the work of Taproot, our vision and our mission and our work. Next slide, please. Just to really quick, just want to let you know that we're working big and hard, but we have a particular lane. And we work the Gulf South, that's Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, and Puerto Rico, and Appalachia. When you think about the Gulf South and Appalachia, you're basically looking at the oil and gas foundational spaces inside of the United States. Oil and gas in the Gulf, coal and gas in Appalachia. So you're looking at the fossil fuel industry and its hold. We'll get to that in a second as we talk a little bit more about climate change, but it's important to understand that the Gulf South and Appalachia coming together is the only chance we've got to reduce greenhouse gas emissions coming from the fossil fuel industries. So really excited to do that work. And there's a bigger piece of this, and it's rooted in a philosophy of extraction and understanding that the extraction of fossil fuels did not just begin, that the philosophy of extraction did not just begin with fossil fuels, that it began with the extraction of people from a continent, the extraction of people's labor and value, the extraction of people's identity. And understanding this philosophy of extraction means that the work that we do globally focuses and begins with the Black diaspora. So we also work in the Americas, Europe, Africa, and the Pacific Islands because we understand climate change as being part of a bigger analysis and a bigger problem. Next slide, please. And as we get into this work, you know, there's lots of folks who understand what climate change is, but there's even more people who don't understand what it is, who don't know what we're talking about when we're saying this word. What is climate change? What does it all mean? The truth is that the Earth is getting warmer. The formula that you need to understand is that there are greenhouse gas emissions going into the atmosphere, causing the Earth to create a blanket around herself and get warmer. As things warm up, the atmosphere, the weather, these things change, and we see more extreme weather and outcomes. So what's causing these emissions, and how do we get the blanket off of us? The answer is the fossil fuel companies are the major proponent of these greenhouse gas emissions, which is why the Gulf South and Appalachia have to be part of a global movement around the climate crisis. And the truth is if we reduce our consumption and our dependence on these things, we could save the planet and save ourselves immediately. The problem is that the globe is particularly governed by a system, an economic system that profitizes, puts profit incentives on more extraction and more harm to our communities. And so what do we have to do? We've got to change the economic system. We've got to protect the communities and engage and catalyze them. And we've got to save the planet. No small feat, but we're not going to do it by saying words like climate change. We probably won't even get to it by saying words like global warming, although those are the words and those are the things. What we know is that communities understand very real concepts that impact them every day. Water, energy, land. These are things that everybody understands. And when we talk about water, we're talking about affordability. We're also talking about rights of nature. We're also talking about human rights to the very thing that your life requires. When we talk about energy, we're talking about, yes, those solar panels that you keep hearing about, but we're also talking about using less energy, having more energy efficiency. What does it mean to even think about the energy sources and where they're coming from, and who should own this stuff and who should control it? When we talk about land, we're talking about not just gardens and not just housing, but land sovereignty. There's an ongoing struggle for land sovereignty in this country that Indigenous brothers and sisters have been pushing. And the question is, how does our labor, our economy, and our democracy help us to manage these very things that our lives depend on? These are the 6 pillars of climate justice from Taproot Earth. We offer this to you as those of you go into your community because we want everyone to understand climate is not a new issue. It is a new context for all issues to figure out their strategy and how they're going to go forward. This is a new reality that we're all going to have to get our mind around. Next slide, please. And so I want to talk a little bit about climate change because most people think about polar bears or think about maybe a winter storm, maybe a hurricane. And this is about those acute events. This is about those animals that maybe we're never going to see, but they are amazing creatures. This is about all of that. But mostly this is, as we've learned in Hurricane Katrina and how so many of us got to know each other in this region, we're talking about a loss of human life. We're talking about a loss of nature and a loss of natural life. We're talking about displacement, mass displacement of people inside the United States just crossing state lines and people crossing international borders. Most of us don't get told, and I'm sure you won't hear that quote border crisis on the southern border isn't just drug cartel or whatever they're calling these folks. These are people who are literally displaced from climate disasters that are happening throughout the Caribbean, Central America, and South America. And folks have no real ability to escape and or rebuild. Migration is a major part of this conversation because we've seen it not just at the southern border, but in places like where I live in Louisiana, where folks are having to migrate because the land is being lost to sea level rise. This is about natural systems, food and water systems, property, infrastructure, industrial systems, and all of those plants that our communities work in. What happens when there's another flood? What happens when there's another explosion? This is about disaster capitalism, gentrification, and continued oppression. Yes, all of those things increase and go fast in disaster. They increase and go faster as we try to deal with the effects of climate change. And one thing that seems to be invisible is how is all of this affecting your mind and your body and your stress levels? How many disasters do you have to be in before your body really absorbs this to a place where you need some help? And we've seen with COVID, another way to understand the impacts of climate change is outbreaks of all kinds of things. The warming temperatures will release lots of things from the Arctic tundra, will allow mosquitoes to go higher up than they have been going. A lot of the problems and issues that we're going to deal with are going to be dealt with the people who have the least amount of resources to mitigate it. And this is where we get into the justice part of climate. We cannot just understand invisible gases. We have to understand the real life impacts on the most marginalized people who are not poor because they don't work hard enough. They're poor because there's a system that keeps them poor and ensures that they will stay there while we see a billionaire class at the largest it has ever been in the history of the planet. This is not just about polar bears. This is about justice. This is about democracy. And this is about our opportunity to engage a system that has created what Kashana mentioned in her opening of the Redress Movement, that it has created these systems and has taken part in the discrimination that we're seeing is now going to be a major factor in whether or not people can recover or even survive a climate impact. Next slide, please. And so let's talk about the environmental impacts of segregation because that's where I'm supposed to go. And so in the next slide, I'll switch to the next. I'll just say there's some really basic things to know. Environmental racism is a starting point. If you've not heard this term, let me say it to you like this. It used to, there's a distinction between when you use environmental racism and environmental justice. Environmental racism is the word that was used to describe the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on communities of color or low are poor folks, low socioeconomic status having folks. This is a term that had to be created because it was clear that toxic, polluting industries were being disproportionately put next to Black communities. Now, if this sounds familiar to you, if you're working on residential segregation, if you're working on housing, if you're working on environment, you might take note of a system that was in place that the government supported, even if the government didn't run, the system of segregating neighborhoods and places that led to a market-based value of land that then led to the cheapest land sometimes being right next to Black communities, brown communities, or poor communities. But that is also where industry, quote, for the good of the state or for the good of the economy, would be allowed to be placed next to. Oftentimes, especially in Louisiana, you see that the same places there were plantations, there are either now prisons or refineries. And this has to do with their proximity to the river. This has to do with their proximity to natural resources. And this has to do with the labor force that was forced to be there since the beginning of this nation. When we talk about environmental racism, we are absolutely talking about statistically proven data that shows a polluting facility is 80 times more likely to be by Black folks, and 100% of the times it's by poor folks. And I just mentioned this because racism, as most people don't really take the time to understand, doesn't just impact the group that it's targeted to. Racism is so sinister that it impacts us all. And so when we have environmental racism, yes, it's the majority of people of color who are getting the hit, but poor white folks are also getting the hit, especially when it comes to places like rural Louisiana and rural Mississippi and rural Texas. When we talk about environmental racism, we're talking about the unequal protection against toxic waste exposure. And we're talking about the ability for the community to make their own decision about what goes next to them, what goes next to their aquifer, what goes next to their, what air are they breathing, what's being put into their air. There are charges of environmental racism across the board, and most of which I'll say Cancer Alley is one of the ones you hear in Louisiana, but there are many cancer alleys. There are many clusters of refineries in places where there are lots of poor and or rural and or Black folks and a polluting facility next to it with air emissions in the air that cause asthma and trouble breathing and respiratory illnesses. But those same emissions and those same industries are putting greenhouse gases into the air and accelerating the climate crisis. If we get to environmental justice, we get to climate justice. And only when we get to environmental justice do we get to climate justice. It's an important link that we must connect because we have to clean up the pollution, stop the pollution, and understand that will result in a reduction of emissions. And then from there, we hit those goals of reducing our greenhouse gases as a country. But in Louisiana and in the Gulf, if we reduce them here, we can reduce them on behalf of the United States and meet all of the targeted numbers that the globe needs the US to meet. This is an important region, not just because of the future that we could bring, the opportunity that Louisiana and Texas can bring to the nation, but it's important because we could, if we wanted to, come up with solutions that repair a legacy that is still very present here in the Gulf and advance climate justice solutions all at the same time. This is going to take political will. This is going to take courage. This is going to take nerve, but mostly this is going to take a mass movement from the United States, from the people of the United States who understand we are not exceptional Americans. We are humans that belong to a human family, and it's time for all of us to begin fighting for each other and for a future where we can all live, rest, and thrive in the places that we love. Next slide, please. One more time. So one thing to think about, especially on this May Day, are some of these consequences of these energy systems that we use. These are photos from the BP oil drilling disaster that happened in 2010 down here in the Gulf. And one thing I want you to understand is that it was terrible, okay? it was millions of gallons of oil, heavy crude oil, not just in our water column in the ocean and killing marine life, but washing up on our shores and our beaches and having to be clean. Once it's in the marsh, it was impossible to get out. And what you see here is a picture of folks cleaning oil off the beach. But what you should also see is that they're on the back of their shirts, it says inmate labor, because inmates were used to clean up the oil of the BP oil drilling disaster. And they were paid, if paid at all, I believe 25 cents an hour, something along those lines, not more than 35, I believe. And that was if they were paid at all. But a bigger thing to notice here is that they have no protective gear. Others who were cleaning up oil and gas off of the coast of Mississippi, volunteers and all of these such, had to go through training and use protective gear to touch that heavy crude because it is a carcinogen, a known carcinogen, but this is what the prison labor, the inmate labor was exposed to. The reason I bring this up is because what's important to understand about the climate movement and about segregation and about the impacts of this is that you can't just look at where does a storm hit. You have to look at where a system ends. Where does a system take its biggest value or its biggest deplete it, at the largest area? We still allow slavery in the United States. We allow slavery in our prison systems. Because we haven't dealt with how that has played out on Black and brown bodies in particular, we necessarily exploit prison labor to the most toxic jobs that prisoners get. What I'm saying is, if we're going to fight for climate justice, we have to fight for environmental justice, we have to fight for labor rights, and we have to fight for criminal justice, because all of these things are being touched by the climate crisis one way or another. Either you're being harmed directly by the impacts, or you're going to be harmed indirectly by the way the system plays and uses its people, its labor, and its power and money to advance only profit and nothing about care for its people. This is an important picture because we have to understand on Labor Day that all of us belong to a labor movement. Care work is real work. Invisible work is real work. Work is work. And we are all thinking about how our labor fits into a system. What if we used our collective labor to change the system? What if we engaged in a movement that said, we want a better quality of environment for people to live in, we want better jobs for people to work in, and we want, yes, even prisoners to be treated as humans, if imprisoned at all, which is a question I'm willing to take up. Let's figure this out. This is where the fight should be. We shouldn't be focused so much on ourselves and our personal reaction to a news story. We should be gathering together to figure out how to shift these systems, not one at a time, but all at the same time. We are running out of time. Next slide, please. One more time, and one more. So the one thing you should get from this slide is, as we talk about labor on Labor Day, as we talk about the impacts of segregation, let's understand that there are folks being treated particular ways in this movement. This is a picture of farm workers out in California, and the infrared picture is to show you all of the pesticides that are on their hands. And this is an infrared picture to show that this is basically poisonous chemicals on their hand. You should be a little bit nervous about this. One, there's poisonous chemicals on this guy's hand. But two, this is the food you eat. This is what's in your grocery store. This is what, even when you're making a really good decision to get that healthy food from the grocery store, this is what's on it. And the basis of these pesticides and these fertilizers is fossil fuel. This is all coming from the fossil fuel industry. And when it is pulled out of the ground, when it is refined, and even when it's sitting on the shelf, it is emitting toxins and fumes and emissions into the air. We have to shift the whole way we do everything. The reason we allow for poison all over the hands of this man is because we allow for particular laborers to be treated different ways. This shows up in our environment. What happens if we were dealing with a group of people that we valued, whose labor we honored, whose health we actually thought about? Your food would actually be healthier if we did that. Not only would this guy's health be healthier. We've got to understand that big ag, the agricultural sector, is a big part of this. And when you think about big agriculture and you think about small farms, it's important for you to understand that Black farmers recently winning a lawsuit against the federal government to get their land back. Black farmers are treated worse than white farmers. Small farmers are being treated terribly by big ag, and big ag, the way it is done, is accelerating the climate crisis. If we fix these things, if we connect these dots, if we understand that the climate reality is not just about an invisible thing that will happen in the future, but it is about the injustices that have been being fought for all along. We have an opportunity to not just save the folks who pick our food and save them from cancer and exposure. We have the ability to save this country and many other countries from falling further away from the vision of democracy. This is our moment. This is a time. This is not the time for us to think in separate issues. This is a time for us to intentionally interlock what we know to be true, which is that this guy's health is directly connected to my health and directly connected to the health of the planet. Next slide, please. Thank you, Omar. Yes. And if we don't talk about labor, then we don't really get to the point. But let's be clear, the standards of the labor sector are rooted in the slave economy. The treatment, the pay, the workers' expectations is treated as we would treat a lot of enslaved labor. Now, I'm not making a parallel. I'm a lawyer. I can tell you what's different about them, but the broader picture is that if we don't value the labor of our labor force, if we don't value the workers, if we don't do this right and different, we don't make the shifts necessary to keep the planet in as healthy a position as we need her in order for our lives to be sustained here. This is not a question of if. We are now at the point of when with the global climate crisis, and the segregation that exists within our communities, within the way people get access to benefits, within the way people are targeted by the system, are absolutely playing out in this climate moment and in this climate movement. It's time for us to choose to do this differently. We could reimagine labor. And on this Labor Day 2024, I hope we all take the time to think about what happens when we have enough. What happens when people have what they need to survive? What could a labor force look like where folks are healthy and people are treated with dignity and folks can choose what they want to do? It's not a pipe dream, it's an opportunity, and we are running out of time. Next slide. One more time. So here's what's important about that big ag, about that environmental justice, about prison labor. The same industries at the heart of environmental racism are the same industries at the heart of the climate crisis. It's an important dot to connect. We are not talking about a whole other sector of people. We're talking about the same sector in charge of making fertilizers, in charge of deep water drilling in the ocean, in charge of the refineries. We are talking about one sector. And if we put our heads together, we can think about how this sector is impacting where we live, how we live, and where we're able to build our lives and nourish our families. One more. Before things are refined, before it's refined, the extraction of those natural resources is really where that emissions is coming from. The carbon dioxide you probably heard of, methane you probably heard of. These are the greenhouse gases we're talking about. When you hear people say GHGs and reduction of GHGs around climate, what they're saying is carbon dioxide. That's one. But don't be fooled, my friends. It's not just carbon dioxide. It's methane, and it's some of these other solutions that people are proposing. Put more of this stuff into the air. We have to be aware of the falsehoods that are being told. They're waiting until we get to a critical moment where we have to act fast, and it's going to be the wrong decision. We don't need to act fast. We need to act now, and we need to act in coordination and collaboration with each other. One more time. The greenhouse gas is what's changing the Earth's atmosphere. One last time. And those changes are what we're seeing with extreme weather. And so this is really just a slide to give you an understanding of what we're talking about with the climate crisis. Because I don't want you to walk away saying, I don't understand climate. You do. You totally do. We're putting this stuff into the air. It's making the globe warm. The globe is warming. It's changing the weather. The weather is bringing us extreme weather events. Extreme weather events absolutely means hurricanes. It absolutely means that, but it also means heat waves and rain events and Arctic blasts and, you know, these big that heat events that start wildfires. That's what we're talking about. It's so warm that it is shifting the weather events, and we're seeing more extreme weather events. This is the climate crisis. But don't think that people migrating from disaster, people looking for jobs, children needing to go to school, don't think that's not a part of this. This is all a part of this. This is all a part of this. And the opportunity is to address all of this together right now. We're running out of time. Next slide. So that was the end for me. I believe we get to do some questions. I don't know if I went too long. Y'all know I get real, you know, the spirit hits me on some of this stuff. But I'll just close by saying, you know, I just really want to thank the Redress Movement and the way you're thinking about these different issues and how they connect with what you're doing. This is the right way to go. And what we need are the folks who you move with to be friends with the folks that we move with, and we need to move together. I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. Thank y'all for the work you're doing and for the things you're thinking through. This is the right way to go. We're honored to be walking next to you.
Thank you so much, Collette. It is always an honor and an absolute pleasure to share space with you. I just continue to learn so much from your work and from your vision. I also want to thank you to make sure to I also want to thank you for making sure to shout out the workers on May Day. I know my 6-year-old and I certainly had our words of gratitude that we offered this morning before school to the workers. And I am absolutely certain that his classmates are getting some lessons today. And so I thank you for that. Shout out to the workers today as well. So we are going to open this conversation up to some questions. I certainly have some, and I do want to encourage everyone to share any questions in the Q&A that you might have, and we'll spend the next few minutes getting to some of those. So I'm going to start with a question that I absolutely know that you have some engagement around. And an attendee has asked how we can engage young people in climate and environmental justice work, particularly those young people living in impoverished and disenfranchised communities where this information may not widely be available or discussed, and their families may not necessarily have access to this information. So the question is, how can we engage young people around work in climate and environmental justice, and particularly those young people still living with the harmful impacts, right, of residential segregation?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And thank you for that, for bringing in the next generation. I have some ideas. The broad statement is they're ready. Believe it or not, they're ready. They know something's happening. They hear it all the time. And the airwaves that the youngsters, the young folks, the next generation are listening to are talking about climate as an absolute fact. You know, we're still dealing with some of the folks in my age group who are like, is it real? And I'm just like, you know what? I can't with you right now. Yes, it's real, and they know it, and they're ready. I think a few things I would offer. I've seen some folks do really, really interesting things. So we've been working with one of our Indigenous organizers, and she's been talking about the anxiety and stress that we're seeing on the youth right now. And one of the things, and this is a Native woman, so she's taking all of these Indigenous youth on a walk. And on the walk, they found an elder to tell them about the plants. And their job was to take pictures of the plants, right? And then there was some sort of like, you know, report back. But what it really gave them was time in nature. It took them out of, you know, a field trip away from the stress of life. And I want to really encourage people to do that. It's really simple. You know, I know these teenagers and stuff, they're not easy humans. But they are generally willing to like go somewhere fun and neat and beautiful. So think about a nature walk. Think about a nature walk with a group. Think about a nature walk with a group where they learn a thing, or just think about getting these next generation folks into nature. When I do it, I ask them a question. Do you know what tree that is? Do you know how old that tree is? What does that tree need to survive? And you're just getting them into the space. Who's ever asked these very simple questions before? Does this tree have a flower? Just get them into that. And then I want to encourage as much as we can for a lot of these nature walks. They end up asking the kids to journal. And what's sad and good, and I think appropriate, is that you get to see a lot of their emotions on that journal, right? It can't always express in the moment, but sometimes a little time in nature is what they need. And then I say, wow, didn't we enjoy that? We got to save that. You know, I was in a boat with a youngster, took her out to South Louisiana, and I said, she was like 9 or 10. And I said, listen, I need you to pay attention to what we see today, because when you have your children, it's not going to be here and nobody's going to know it was here. And you're going to have to be the one to tell the story. And she ended up like writing a story and a poem, and, you know, and she was like 9 or 10. She's in high school now. She's going to graduate. And she's still remembering what she saw in South Louisiana. We can get them involved little by little. We don't have to throw the book at them. We can take them somewhere. We can have an experience. And by the way, it'll probably do us some good too, to get out in nature. What about a family trip or a block trip to a place that is beautiful, and then asking a question: what do we need to do to save this? What do we need to do to protect this? You know, what do we need to do to feel like this is ours, to do something about it? And I think go from there. So I just want to offer that we don't have to have the booklet and the curriculum. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we can just have a few minutes to re-engage. We've got to re-indigenize and reroute. That's what we got to do as humans, or else we won't win.
You know, Collette, I think that is so, it's such an awesome answer, right? And, you know, I'm always clear that I am not an organizer. I am just lucky enough to work with them, okay? I do not have that skill set. And I'm very clear about that. That said, right, having been part of communities, right, where organizers are working and present for a very long time, you know, I'm very clear about this tenet of meeting people where they are, right? Yeah. Yes. And so I think you have presented so gracefully, right, a very actionable way, right, of making this issue real, and entering into conversation with young people, right, around something that can be very anxiety and stress inducing. And so I just want to follow up then with a similar related question that came into the Q&A chat box, right? Mm-hmm. Which is that oftentimes these conversations can come off a bit scary. They can induce right, fear and stress in people. And so is there something maybe a little bit more you want to say around striking a balance, right, to bring people into the work in a way that does not necessarily provoke fear?
Yeah, that's a brave question. That's a brave question. Because I think we as Americans have been sitting inside of privilege long enough to think that we could and should and will be able to avoid fear. But if you are paying attention to this climate crisis, you should be very concerned, if not fearful. It is that bad. That's how bad it is. We were fighting to stay at 1.5 degree change in our global temperatures. We are now in a position to go past 2 degrees in our global temperature. This means in less than 6 years, by 2030, if we don't do something drastic, most of us will not be living the way we are living right now. We won't be able to. And that is scary. There is fear there. I think what we need, instead of ways to avoid fear, which we do because of privilege. Our privilege allows this. This is the part of our Americanness we blame the other side for, but we got it too. It's on us too, right? Our privilege allows us to try to avoid it. What we need instead is to practice the courage to look at it and walk straight through it. Because fear isn't real. You know, fear is not danger. Fear is the thing that's in your head. Danger is the thing that's before you, but fear is the thing that's in your head. So we're going to have to deal with fear, and you got to learn how to do it. You have to practice it. We have practiced keeping everybody away from fearful things, and we are out of practice. And now we have the most fearful thing you could possibly imagine, and we all want to stick our heads in the sand like an ostrich. But what we actually need is to remember a history of resistance, to remember the miracles and the impossible moments, a labor movement that sets standards. We have a 5-hour work week because some people got together and fought for it, and unions and benefits. They didn't just give that to the workers, they fought for that. They got together and they fought for that. And they've been fighting and continue to fight globally. This is what we have to decide to do. I'm sure that's scary. They do it anyway. And that's where we have to get to, especially those of us who have children and nieces and nephews and things like that. We can't raise them to be scared. At this point, we have to be raising very courageous generational leaders, because this is going to get terrible, especially if we move from fear. We make bad decisions when we move from fear. You have to be free in this moment, as free as possible. Even in a tough moment, you've got to be free. And fear is what's locking us up. It's what's got this country gripped. It is why people are going to scarcity and lines and corners and categories. That is what is happening. You got to break all of that. If we're going to be together, you got to break all of that. I think nature plays a role. You'll be surprised. I've seen some kids with some real issues get around some water and calm down and express themselves because they were able to be calm. I've seen grown men next to a beach in the water by a tree calm down. I think we have to face the truth, but maybe let's face it with an intentional time in nature. We have beautiful parks. We have beautiful places. We got woods and we got swamp. We got places you can pull over to the side of the road over here and just look at how beautiful it is and what we're fighting for. I don't know that we're going to get away from the fear. Of course, I'm not that kind of person. There's someone who can give a better answer to this, but my answer is what we need to do instead is practice walking through that fear, getting to the other side. Black people got to do it every day. Poor people got to do it every day. We have to face that fearfulness every day, and we're still here. It's proof that you walking through it and practicing it, you will be okay. It's not easy. Not saying that. Not saying that. I'm just saying you can do it. We can do it. We can do it.
I'm so thankful for your reflection, Collette. I was, as soon as you started shouting, I was over here reminding myself that or as soon as you started speaking, I was over here reminding myself that I'm on camera and I cannot start shouting. But, the reality is, right, is that we are descended from people whose history is such that we are not even supposed to be here.
Not even supposed to be here. We've seen the impossible. We are proof of the impossible.
And so how dare we, right, not move past that fear?
That's right.
And so I think that is the perfect answer. There is no better one. The reality is that it's not necessarily possible, right. To remain fear-free.
Right.
But that the real issue is, what do we do, right? Yeah. Besides, in addition to being afraid. And so I just very much appreciate that.
That's real. And we got to watch, you got to watch this movement of self-care being about you being by yourself, right? Instead, you've got to anticipate that this dealing with fear and being okay, you can only do that with somebody else.
Absolutely.
Sometimes a lot of other people, at least one other person with you. Do it together. Let's remember what it is to build community and get our power from that place.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I do want to ask a little bit specifically around climate migration, right?
Yeah.
And you talked a lot about, environmental justice versus environmental racism, and specifically around the ways in which, right, communities of color and lower income communities are, always the sites, right, of these environmental hazards. So following that line, I wanted to start first, right, as we see the global impacts of, environmental racism and the global impacts of climate change, which you spoke a lot about. We know, right, that climate migration is happening within the United States, and it is also happening across the globe. That's right. As people continue, right, to move around, to escape, or be further from, right, the impacts of climate change. How do you see within the United States these climate migration patterns impacting our residential segregation patterns in communities across the country?
Yeah, this is the question that I'm hoping Redress Movement, your partners really take on, because this is going to be the issue. One of the big ones, for sure, because we've never fixed our housing issue. We've never fixed it. We've never really had enough courage to, call a thing and address the segregation that is innately, and just intricately just nailed to the housing work that we do federally, especially, but housing in general. I see three things that we should pay attention to. One is how people are going to, what's going to happen to the people who lose their property. There is, an acceleration of the climate crisis is the fault of very few, you can count them on two hands, very few fossil fuel companies in the world. And if they stopped, you could have a certain level of mitigated impact on your home, especially if you lived in a particular place. But they're not stopping, they're increasing, they're going. So what we have is purposeful acceleration of the climate crisis by an industry. I wonder what's going to happen to the people who lose their houses. After Hurricane, I believe it was Ida, maybe before then, but below I-10 here in Louisiana and across the board, it's hard to get insurance on your home. It's hard to get, when your insurance finishes, it's hard to get a renewal. What's going to happen to the people whose homes are being allowed to lose value because of sea level rise that is being accelerated by an industry that is making profits? These are usually federally called buyouts. These are usually like relocation efforts. And I wonder how that's going to look. But I can tell you right now, the first federal dollars for climate relocation came to Louisiana and went to Ile de Jean-Charles, which was a Native American, a large Native American population. And those folks have been removed from their island onto a new place, and they are not happy. It was not well done. Surprise, surprise, the United States did not move indigenous people well into new housing. And their island has now been taken by private recreation organizations that have been building camps to go fishing and hunting on the very residences these folks were told to leave, and they would not get any government assistance. There is a whole situation around what's going to happen to the people whose homes and residences will be impacted by sea level rise. And this gets to redlining. Where's the low level? What's going to flood first? This gets all the way back to redlining, and all the way back to segregation of particular groups of people, including indigenous people who were moved off of their territory down to the very ends of Louisiana and now are on the coast, and that coast is going to be taken by the sea. What are we going to do with that? That's number one. That's a big issue. That's a big problem. And I don't know what's going to happen there. I suspect we're going to see some new policies around relocation because so many people are going to have to relocate. And what does it mean for indigenous sovereignty? And what does it mean for people who lived in, these freedmen spaces that allowed for family units to live together? Not one person that buys a house, but a whole unit and a network of people that can take care of each other. I think the second issue is, where are these folks going to go? They call them receiving communities. We're seeing right now lots of developers who don't say the word climate change, but they're buying up high ground in Miami. They're buying up land around the Great Lakes. They're buying up land all over where there's water sources near. This thing is real. The only people who don't believe this is real are the folks who are getting algorithms to tell them to be chaotic in their understanding of the world. If you just turn that stuff off for a second and look around, this thing is real. And folks are buying property in places that have good water sources and are away from what we know will all be coastal flooding in every major coastal city, including New Orleans, including Miami, including New York and Boston, including San Francisco, including Los Angeles. It's not just poor old New Orleans down here. This thing is going to hit everybody. And where are folks going to go? And when they get there, how are they going to be treated? Well, let me tell you, we learned hard lessons post-Katrina, how people were treated. The first couple months, everybody, the Lord was praying for you. You know what I mean? The middle months in there, you weren't being talked to very much. Later, they start resenting you for being there and needing there. They call them Katrina refugees. They call them anything other than neighbor. And are we ready for massive amounts of people to shift into other spaces? We could actually get ready. We could actually be preparing communities to receive. We could actually give incentives, job opportunities, education opportunities, and benefits for communities to receive. We can't force it. You're going to have to grow it. And we only have 6 years to the point of no return. We need to be doing that now. If you wait too late and you force populations on each other, they're going to eventually blame those populations for fighting each other or harming each other. And they're going to throw their hands up and say, we don't know why, they just can't get along. This is the kind of thing we need to be anticipating, because it's going to happen, because it happened already in Katrina. And then the last thing I'll say is, how are we thinking about housing, residents, living, lodging in a different way? Now is the opportunity to be thinking about what ownership means in an indigenous land sovereignty struggle. Do the indigenous people of that freshwater area want to give people the right to own property? Does owning property come with a bigger responsibility, or is there a different way we need to be thinking about this? I don't have an answer, but I'm pointing out that we have an opportunity, and it's a short window and it's closing, but this is one of those moments in the universe where we'll never get again. And we're gonna wish we tried a thing, did a thing, or reimagined a thing. And I think there's real opportunity. How can we make housing that addresses the discriminatory impact of housing from the past? How can we prepare for that? How do we think about repair inside of solutions? This is that opportunity. This is that moment. It's going to take a lot of courage, and it's going to take a level of political leadership that I'm not certain we have anymore. I hope there's some people out there still ready and still willing to fight, but this is the opportunity, and we're running out of time.
Collette, I thank you so much. You know, I have so much more that I would love to ask you about, speak to you about. Now, I know we're going to have a chance to take this offline, and I'm so thankful for that. But I would love to keep chatting with you, keep asking you questions, but I know you have too much to do for that. So we are going to wrap up there. But again, as always, it is such a pleasure to share space with you, to learn from you, to work beside you. I'm so thankful for you and for your example and for your courage.
Thank you.
I appreciate you so much for spending this time with us today. And I want to offer my deep and heartfelt thanks to you on behalf of the staff and the board of the Redress Movement. I also want to encourage everyone who has joined us today to visit taproot.earth, get connected to the work that Taproot Earth is doing. Make sure that you are following their social media channels and that you take every opportunity to engage. I also want to thank the staff of the Redress Movement who has worked to put this together. Thank you so much to Grace Goober and Sumner Bright for all of your support and all of the work that you have done to pull off another one of these lessons from the field conversations. I thank you all for joining us today. Please do visit redressmovement.org. If you haven't already signed up to take actions and to follow our work, please make sure to do that as well. Thank you again for your time, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you so much. Take care.